Hi, everyone. My name is Lamar Richards, and I am here today to give my SECU Public Fellows presentation on the work I've been doing this summer as a public fellow with Rural Fort, North Carolina. So, just some brief history about me and background about me. I am the youngest of five. My mom is, engineer, engineer consultant for Sleep Number Incorporated in Columbia, South Carolina. And my dad, who is now deceased, was the bishop at South Carolina's largest and most historic African American church. And you can see me picture here with my family at my graduation and one of my older brothers. My family is originally from Charleston, South Carolina, which is where my family grew up and things like that. And then I am a permanent resident of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is where I live. And that a lot of that sows into who I am, my Southern charm, as they like to call it. And I think part of this is that the work I've been doing this summer has spoken with me, has really allowed me to use my experiences growing up in a rural community and growing up in a rural neighborhood, because it's allowed me to connect with the work I'm doing on a more personal level. So a little bit about Rule Forward. So Rule Forward is it's many things. I like to call it the best kept secret of rural North Carolina because it's many things. It does many things. One thing that Rule Forward is not is a single thing. And so Rule Forward has a large footprint across North Carolina, and we work with various nonprofits and organizations across the state. And in those rural communities, we do a number of things to support. We do trainings and facilitation. We help with grant applications and development. We also, of course, help with policy and procedure, strategic planning, and strategic development for those who work on strategic plans, things like that. We help build relationships and broker trust in between organizations that are looking to do that, to foster trust, whether it's internally or externally. I mean, oftentimes that even may mean rebuilding trust versus fostering trust. We help with conflict management, which kind of souls into sometimes into that portion I spoke about with rebuilding trust. Identification of expertise, coaching and program planning. And this is just, this isn't an exhaustive list, right? The list is, ever evolving. The reality is Rule Forward is like, the neighbor that's always there to help in ensuring that, when we go in, we help these organizations, nonprofits, be successful in a way that they don't need us to come back in again, but instead they can thrive in their area. And so I'm going to highlight a couple of specific programs that we've worked with Rural Forward. And like I said, it's not exhaustive. And one of those is being, my specific work. So my county's impact. And so, I am, really focused on the southeast of North Carolina, including Columbus, and Bladen County. And then I also am doing some work this summer in Halifax County with the Halifax County Recreation Advisory Group. And so most of my work, like I said, is consolidated in the southeast of the state. And that is because the program associates and the program manager, project managers at Rural Forward are assigned geographically to different areas across the state. And so when you're going out into the community, it's better to work, in several counties that are geographically closer to each other versus as opposed to traveling across the state back and forth to different counties that are nowhere near each other. And so a lot of the work, that I've been doing, well, actually all the work I've been doing this summer has been virtual, as a virtue of the fact that we're still navigating a global pandemic. And that has in fact impacted a lot of work that we're doing in community. I think it's been many challenges that we faced. We have found that it has been more difficult to reach community virtually, especially rural parts of the state where, there's not a lot of accessibility in terms of internet or in terms of technology. And then there's also, right, the big internet divide, where, people of a certain age group or a certain demographic are just less likely to have certain skill sets when it comes to technology as a result of how they progress either through education or when they grew up, what was available to them. And so part of what we're doing is work with the North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Network. And so this is an exciting new group that brings together voices, perspectives, and leaders from from the public sector, private sector, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, as well as any organizations that are any people, even any individuals who are interested in discussing ways to actively get community voice and how we appropriate and give resources during a disaster, and more importantly, how we as a community collectively recover, and what kind of support systems we have in place to assist us with that. And so, part of this is, these organizations are coming, in this network, they're building a relationship that is going to expand beyond this, NCIDR. It's going to also allow them to broker relationships that will help them with grants and help them with resources. But it starts here. And so part of what we're doing in this is we're looking at the resources that are available. This is a snapshot, right? We have the participatory evaluation framework, which we worked on this summer. That and that essentially helps us to identify opportunities for system level changes that lead to more equitable outcomes in disaster recovery. And then we also have, right, for example, what are the resources for natural hazards? How does one address that? And then more importantly, what is the action plan for this entire network? And one of the things that we really focused on this summer that Rule 4 is really concerned that, it keeps as a priority is how do we ensure that we're strategically moving forward at a rate and in a way that is productive, that gives, that allows us to stay on task and allows us to meet our goals. What are our end goals? It's something we repeatedly ask ourselves to make sure we're on the right track. And there will be times, and there have been times, where we had to kind of go off track. But what has repeatedly happened is we have evolved our plan. So the action team plan, for example, has evolved alongside our work to ensure that we stay on task and that we can, have one cohesive plan that still reaches our end goal. And this is just a snapshot here of the meetings, right? These meetings are open to everyone who's interested in talking about disaster recovery work. And so, you can have people on here from 50 to 100, 200 people who are interested in discussing these things at different points in times. And that's really exciting. Folks from all across the state. So then another project that I worked on this summer is Resilient Columbus Collaborative, and this is a graphic that I made for them this summer. And Resilient Columbus, it's a collaborative indoor group that promotes, resilience in Columbus County through education and engagement of community members regarding the lifelong impacts of adverse childhood experiences. And we're going to come back to that, the type of adverse childhood experiences, but just about, Resilient Columbus itself, this collaborative encourages us to ask questions in our households that are important for the success of a child to successfully matriculate through childhood and be a productive member of society. Some of those questions include, how can we have less suspensions in school? Or what are the best environments for success? And or what are the best techniques to foster resiliency in adolescent children and families? And some that aren't on here, for example, what might be the contributing factors that I may be contributing to an adverse situation for my child as a parent? And so part of this is, right, realizing, recognizing, responding, and resisting to these adverse childhood experiences. So I want to kind of talk about adverse childhood experiences now, and I'm going to come back to the, how do we foster resilient communities? And so part of this is looking at abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And so a lot of times we think about abuse, we think about abuse in the terms of just physical abuse. But, abuse is also, can be mental, emotional, and sexual, and sometimes isn't physical at all, but it's still abuse. And so, we must be cognizant there are multiple ways of abuse. Similarly with neglect. There are multiple ways, to neglect to neglect a child or to neglect, someone from your family. And in most instances, surprisingly, the neglect is emotional and not actually physical. But the reality is, when you're talking about how does one recognize neglect, it is often the most unrecognized form of an adverse experience. And then you have household dysfunction, which includes mental illness, incarcerated relative, violence in the parent community, divorce, substance abuse, and these are just to name a few. They're basically events and happenings that sow into the dysfunction of the household. And so to go back to, if I can go back here, I guess I can't go back. I can. To go back to this slide on, how do we foster resilient communities? Something that I really enjoyed learning about this summer was, when you're working to foster resilient communities, that includes, right, realizing, recognizing, responding, and resisting. And so part of this is realizing the educational piece, which is the biggest piece, right? How understanding and learning how the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths of recovery during adverse childhood experiences. And then, how to recognize that, and then how do you adequately and effectively respond in a way that makes sure that this does not happen again. And then, of course, resist. We must, after we've addressed this, and we've recognized and responded to it, we must resist ways, any instances where we may re-traumatize a child and or a family member during our interactions with them, right? And so one one more project I'm working on is Courageous Conversations in Columbus County. And part of this, right, is the press method, right? Having problem awareness, root cause analysis, empathy, strategy, and sacrifice. And here we are again asking questions, right? Encouraging the use of the questions. Do I understand what the problem is and where it comes from? Do I care enough, right? So there's a difference between caring and caring to the point where I care enough about the problems and the people that it harms. And do I know how to correct the problem and am I willing? Part of this and why this is necessary in today's political climate of our country is these conversations encourage folks to get out of their comfort zone and have those very challenging conversations about the role that race, the role that systemic racism and race plays into the everyday lives of American citizens. And more importantly, encourage everyone in that space to become educated about everyone's experiences, because everyone doesn't experience things, everything the same. And so, in this space, I can feel safe that everyone in this space is committed to knowing how I feel as a human being and my personhood, and the same for them. And part of this, and this is the final slide, is how we, tie in the racial equity framework, right? To contextualize it all. So contextualization, community-centered, and, reparations in terms of how do we ensure that the solutions we're offering are are offering, reparative methods. And so, reparations in terms of how can we always ensure that what we're contextualizing and what we're centering with the community is repairing the issue and not just putting a band-aid over it. And so part of this is, right, looking at solutions that address a systemic inequity and solutions developed in collaboration with affected communities, and then of course solutions that cause the inequity itself, and how do we ensure that we repair those to the point where they no longer exist in that fashion. And I want to go back to kind of to this, initial slide here and just talk about how much I have enjoyed my time at Rural Forward. Just, it it's a lot of things, but most importantly, it's, I've become educated on how much work truly goes into community building, trust building, and working alongside rural communities that often lack the resources necessary to be completely successful. So you must be very creative, and you must be very outgoing and very willing to know that every day is something new. You never know what you're going to expect in these situations. And so I really have enjoyed this work, and I'm very fortunate to the uh, to the to SECU and to the Carolina Center for Public Service for affording us this opportunity, and for allowing us to work, allowing me in particular to work with Rural Forward. I really appreciate it, and I hope that my presentation, which is only a fraction of the work that I did with Rural Forward, was enlightening for you all, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at any time. Thank you all.